Hello again out there in VIP Kidland. It's Teacher Christy back again by request. Now this is the second in my series of how to deal with timing issues in terms of pacing your classes. By the way, if you like my videos, hit subscribe, click the like. Keeps me thinking that you guys want to keep watching them, and I'll keep making them as long as I have people that are interested, because I just love this job and I love all the different things that can come from it. But it's also a hard job with sometimes a hard learning curve, and if I can help out even a little bit, that really makes me happy. So let me know if you like these. Okay, today it's how do you deal with the slow students. These are more difficult for me than the fast students. The fast students, I have a lot of tips and tricks that I use to kind of speed them along. The slower students are a little bit more difficult. My experience is that the slow students tend to fall into one of two categories. So category one are the students that like to talk about everything except the lesson. And so getting through the slide is a bit miserable, because they're talking about this and they're talking about that, and they're bringing you toys and they're doing stickers and they're doing drawings, and they're just doing everything but what you're asking them to do. I do have a couple of those students as regulars. How I've dealt with that is if the student is doing productive language, so they're talking to me but just not about grammar, and they're really conversing on a conversational level, I'll often let them do that. I'll let them go off task, and I'll come back and I'll bring them back to task on terms of the slides. But I tend to go through the slides more quickly and allow that conversation. But one thing I've learned, I always put that in the parent feedback. I always say, for example, David did a great job today. He was really excited to talk to me. His conversational skills are growing. It was difficult to get to all the slides because I wanted to encourage his conversation. If you'd rather I focus on the slides and finish them all I can, just let me know in the feedback. Every single time I've written that, and I've told the parent to let me know if they would rather I discourage that conversation and finish all the slides, or they'd rather I continue conversation. Every time, hands down, they'll say that they want me to continue the conversation. And almost every time the kid actually comes back and is slightly more focused. And so that usually works out really well, because the parents help us find a balance. They help us find a middle line. And then that biggest thing is that parent's not going to come back and write a bad feedback saying Christy didn't do all the slides. I'm explaining to them what happened. I'm giving them a choice. And that saves one of the biggest 4-star, 3-star feedback issues. They want to see you finish them. But if they know what you're doing, a lot of times that will help. So that tends to be very productive. I have a couple regulars that I see all the time. They probably spend 15 minutes talking about everything but the slides, and I bring them back and I make sure they understand the slides. But I do let them kind of go, and I make sure the parents know that that's what they're paying for, and those are what they want. And so that's okay to do, but my suggestion is I always tell the parents, because I've never gotten negative feedback when I've made sure that they know why. The other slow is tends to be students that struggle to find the words. They actually often are very good students, but they want to find the exact perfect word, the exact right word. And it can be very time consuming. Or the slow readers. So a couple tips for those students: limit the questions you ask. I usually ask a lot of questions. Do you like dogs? Do you like blue? Do you like the truck? Do you drive in a truck? With the students that are slower, I limit all of those questions, because the processing speed to deliver that response is slower, and I can only ask so many. So I'm careful how I expand. And with those students, I often provide an example. So if I want them to produce a sentence, for example, that is, I hear a sound, it is the cars, I'll say, I hear a sound, it's the bird. What about you? I find that's incredibly helpful if I provide them that example sentence first, in terms of helping that process speed along. The second thing that I do is I don't have them read every single slide. With most of my students, I make them read everything, the teacher stuff anyway, if there's time. But with these students, I really am careful. And a lot of times they want to read it all. And you know that paragraph's going to take 10 minutes. So I'll say, okay, teacher will read this one and you read the next one. And I really just kind of stop them and say, teacher's going to read this one. And I'll read these slides. If they're comprehension questions, that sometimes can produce a lot, I'll go back to the slide, where the reading was, and I'll underline the specific answer so they can know where to look for that. And sometimes you're only going to get to a couple points on a slide. So if there's 10 questions using conjunctions, pick 2, pick 3, because you want to get through the material. And sometimes with the students that are processing that information slower, it's better to do 2 really good ones than to try to rush them through 10 and really work through that particular thing. Whenever I have a student that doesn't finish the slides, and sometimes they don't, there's a student, I think a couple weeks ago, that I really felt it was very important to continue to practice particular skill. I knew she wasn't going to finish them all, but this pronunciation was a real key component that I thought was really important. And so I did write in the feedback, Maria worked very hard on this topic, and I really wanted to make sure she mastered that. We were unable to finish some of the other slides, but it'll be covered in the next chapter. And that's really useful. Parents actually really appreciate that. I think sometimes they just want to know that you're doing it with a purpose and with a meaning. One of the things, I don't leave a lot of teacher feedback for teachers to read, but if I have a student that's a slow student, I'll always write teacher feedback because it's so much easier for teachers to be prepared. And for me to know, okay, some of the things I might expand on, I need to skip because that first 3 slides could take a half hour if, you're asking a student who is producing language less quickly than you'd like. Those are a couple tips. I hope they're helpful. Sometimes it's just finding the right balance. To avoid the bad feedback, what works for me is really communicating with the parents. Hope it was helpful. See you tomorrow.